Warhammer 40,000 Renegades, Lord of Excess by Rich McCormick. Chapter 14. Sarkwill depressed the chain cannon's trigger, and the ancient barrels started to spin. The whine was musical. Sarkwill was meticulous in his maintenance of his weapon, but it took a few moments to build to its crescendo. It was all Sergeant needed. The transhuman body she dwelled in was not as perfect as the form she had once held, but it was still fast and strong. They found themselves at odds on occasion, but when their purposes were aligned, they could will Xantine's Space Marine form to feats of strength and skill that no flesh-and-blood consciousness could ever achieve. She leapt from the throne and rolled as the first shells spat from the muzzle of the chain cannon. They tore through thick carpet, sending tufts of material into the sweet-smelling air of the chamber. She kept moving, her armoured legs pumping, her black hair whipping behind her head, until she reached hard cover, a huge symbol of Slaanesh crafted from Eldari bones. She dropped, squatting on her haunches, her back pressed against the relic. The pleasure of the flesh thrummed in her hand as she felt a brief connection with the demon that inhabited the weapon. The chain cannon begun its dirge once more, and the symbol exploded, sending splintered bone fragments bouncing off her pauldrons. More suffering for that benighted race. Delicious. She moved again, firing the demon-possessed pistol as she ran. Each shot hit, but the gun quivered as it waited to smell hyper-oxygenated blood in the air. But Sarkwill's thick Tartarus plate absorbed the impact of the mass reactive shells. She felt the weapon's disappointment. "Don't pout, little one," she said, as she halted again. This time, behind the enlarged silver effigy of Xantine himself, there is always more pain. Sarkwill padded forward, quiet as ever. "Is this how the glorious Xantine leads? Allowing your Neverborn to fight on your behalf?" He injected poison into his voice. "You feel like you're in control?" It was almost imperceptible, but she heard a quiver in his voice. It wasn't fear. The anathema had cruelly bred that most delectable of emotions out of these insipid creations, but it was something close. Uncertainty. This was not going as Sarkwill expected. It was not as Xantine expected either, she knew. She felt his consciousness moving gently within her, agitated and confused. They had made an arrangement, but she was prolonging the pleasure, toying with her prey. It felt wonderful. The demonic form had been utterly obliterated by her Eldari captors, and the subsequent millennia of captivity had rendered her too weak to take her new host's body outright. But the city had nourished her, so close she could taste its suffering and its misery, its pleasure and its joy. She had hidden her strength from everyone, even her host, and used it now in this vital, pulsing, muscular form. Her twin hearts beat with hot blood, her muscle fibers bunched in anticipation. The senses rang with scents and tastes, images and sounds. She turned and dug her shoulder into the pedestal of the statue. The pink ceramite of her armour scraped against the metal. She pushed. The statue swayed, tipping forward, then back towards her. She rode the momentum and pushed again. An almighty heave sent the depiction of Xantine toppling towards Sarkwill. The Terminator swung his power fist at the artwork, caving in its inanimate chest with an almighty crack, and redirecting its bulk to slam harmlessly against the chamber floor. The statue's head dislodged and rolled lazily until it came to rest, face frozen in a beatific smile. Sergeant used the distraction, planting one armoured boot on the toppled pedestal before launching herself forward. Her weight braced against the sharp point of her rapier. She aimed the weapon at Sarkwill's breast, aching for the kiss of blood and bone as it tore through the Space Marine's fused ribcage and enlarged organs. But she was denied. Sarkwill was off balance and couldn't bring his power fist to bear, but the Terminator reacted with admirable speed. He lifted his chain cannon instead, putting the bulky weapon between the trunk of his body and the tip of the blade. It was just enough. The rapier raked through the weapon's casing before sliding up Sarkwill's right arm, carving a deep furrow in the purple ceramite. The gouge sparked and hissed, venting gases. Sarkwill roared with pain and frustration. Her blackened lips shaped into a smile at the sound. It wasn't the pain that she craved. She wanted raw, wet agony of a slow, killing wound, but the Space Marine's reactions showed that she'd hit something deep, something important. That was good. The giant rolled and came up in a lithe fighting stance, firing the pleasure of the flesh from the hip. Mass reactives blossomed against Sarkwill's chest, where they dug holes in the pristine plate. Pinpricks of pain spiked in the ether again, but nothing substantial enough to fell the warrior. She would need to get closer, feel his hot breath on her face as he died. Sir John fell forward, her fingers disappearing halfway into the thick carpet, and ran like an animal, 4 limbs pumping to close the ground between the 2 figures. Her eyes flicked between power fist and chain cannon as she ran, anticipating a parry, waiting to see which way to feint before burying the rapier in her prey. She didn't see the boot. Sarkle swung his tree-trunk leg forward, catching her as she charged. Her own velocity, unnatural, impossible, inhuman, counted against her, and she crumpled, winded, to the floor. She was wheezing curses to her temporary mortal weakness when Sarkle pressed his boot against her chest, and she felt the solid bone cage of her ribs creak under the incredible weight of both the giant and his ornate armour. "Not so fast now, are we?" Sarkle said. "It is a shame to destroy one of Slaanesha's creations, but you cannot be trusted, demon." He raised his chain cannon and aimed it at her forehead. She took in its snarling jaws, traced 6 blackened barrels back to the depths of the ancient weapon. Spacemen would not beg for their life, but she was no space marine. She was a creature of desire, pleasure, and pain, of obsession and indulgence, and the concept of oblivion, a plane of no sensation, horrified her. She offered Sarkle slaves, weapons, soldiers. She offered him Slaanesha's favour, even though it was not hers to give, and promised to bring him to his father, even though Fulgrim would not grant him audience. She offered him anything, everything that he could ever want. And when that failed, when Sarkle simply stared back with his dark eyes, she clawed and scratched and raved, black foam frothing from black lips. It was all for naught. Sarkle depressed the trigger of the chain cannon. The weapon exploded. The rapier had cut deep, severing key arteries inside the cannon's bulky frame, causing catastrophic failure when it was finally fired. Barrels erupted outwards, bending and bowing like a flower blossoming. Its trigger receiver and ammunition cylinder simply ceased to exist, atomized by the detonation. Light and sound filled her senses. There was pain too. Hot shrapnel tore through the meat of her face, glazing her cheeks with blood that ran like tears. But there was more pain in this room. Sarkle's right arm was missing, vaporized to the elbow. What remained of the limb hung limp against his side, pink white bone degloved by the force of the blast. Explosions continued up the chain cannon's ammunition feed as it hung limp at his waist. Staccato detonations leading towards the reactor on the back of the Tartarus armor. He stumbled, power fist clutching at his missing arm as he tried to steady himself, howling in agony. Sarkle staggered between portraits and landscapes, smashing sculptures and knocking over busts, destroying the cultural wealth of this world in his pain. He stopped. Finally, massive feet splayed wide. His face mask of rage. He was framed against the window, framed against the purples and pinks, blacks and golds of the great rift. She thought of that place, a shifting tide of sensation, where she could shed this mortal frame and rejoin her patron and prince, by his side after millennia alone. But not yet. There was pleasure to be had first. Improvising, she hurled anguish, full force at Sarkle's central mass. The warrior reacted too slow, blinded by pain or frustration or both, and the blade, perfectly thrown, bored through his stomach armor, and found skin, muscle, blood, and organs as it travelled, soft and yielding as it passed through them all, tearing and ripping until it reached something hard, bone, the bone of Sarkle's spine, where it finally stopped its course. Starlight reflected in his metal pate as he staggered backwards, carried by the momentum of the thrown rapier towards the window. His shoulder touched Glassaic, and it shattered, allowing the cold of the city into the chamber. It touched her skin like a caress. It started to fall into the void. She moved faster than she thought this body could. She caught the hilt of the rapier in one hand, arresting the fall. Her glove was already sticky with gore. The white of the silk now stained red with Sarkle's innards. The giant teetered at the window, his feet on the ledge, his body suspended above a precipitous drop into the lower reaches of the overcity. His wide, pleading, hers slittered, feline, for a moment, a perfect study in opposites. It could not last. The blade was buried deep in muscle and bone, but Sarkle was too heavy in his Tartarus plate. The monomolecular blade of anguish dislodged from its home amongst the thoracic vertebrae, and the huge space marine slid backwards. Blood and bone fragments burst from the wound as the ancient weapon left his body completely. A bloom of red and white that the warrior seemed to wear on his chest like a flower. as he fell from the council tower, past massive hab blocks, vast agglomerations of pipes, and statues the size of skyscrapers. The augmented transhuman eyes could no longer track it. She reached out with her other senses, the ones only her kind possessed, but could not locate Sarkwill's soul among the millions that call Serene their home. You could delve into the city's depths to find her prey. Imagine Sarkwill, weak and dying, his bones broken, his body pulverized. She would enjoy placing her sword between his shoulder blades, leaning on the weapon until it drew out the last of his lifeblood. But she might not find him, or worse, he might be dead already. Such a tiresome possibility. No pleasure at all. She looked out into the city, its lights dimmed, its soul flickering like candles as they slumbered. Others burned brighter, engaging in the pleasures that Slaanesh encouraged. He would join them, she decided. He could show them such delights. End part 2. I have to say, I'm kind of scared for Xantine. Oh boy. I feel like he's, I feel like she's not gonna have a good time. I feel like he's not gonna have a good time. I feel like Sarkwill is right about Sajanth. I don't think she can be trusted. It always spoke of not being able to take his body yet. So I think that is her endgame, is to have a Space Marine body, or a capable body, to, you know, do her thing with. But I'm not sure. I don't... She's a character that makes me uneasy. I like all the Emperor's Children. They're all very human characters, which is not something you really see in Space Marines all that often. But these guys, they're all perfectly imperfect. And I like that about them. I don't want to see bad things happen to them. And we knew it was coming, let's be honest, but I kind of liked Sarkwill. I thought he was interesting. It would have been nice to see more conflict between him and Xantine. I feel like they could have expanded a bit more on these 8 years. 8 years is a long time for a time skip. But that's the choice of the narrator. They probably just needed to get to the next part of the thing. I wonder if there's going to be another time skip in Chapter 3, though. Suppose we'll find out next time. Yeah.